and we will go on to chapter 9. So again, chapter 9 is an application, but this is application to international trade. So we're applying what we've learned, not to taxation in chapter 8, but now in chapter 9 to international trade. So we'll look at what is our imports and exports. We'll look at what determines how much of a good a country will import or export. And then we'll look at who benefits from trade and who are the winners and losers. And would the gains outweigh the losses? And then we'll see what happens if policymakers decide to restrict imports. We'll see who gains and who loses. And does the gain from restricting input outweigh the losses? And then we'll look at some other common arguments for restricting trade and see if they have merit. Okay, so think about your clothes you're wearing today. Where did you get them? Did you make your own clothes? Well, some people do some knitting, so that's possible. But most people, we buy the clothes from some store, a department store or the shop. Who worked to produce these clothes? If you look at your label, it would say made in some country. So it could be, a lot of them are made in China, but nowadays you get like made in Bangladesh or made in Vietnam. Well, so there are also some clothes made in Taiwan. Yeah, so what country they're made in. So you have a lot of these countries who make clothes. And what would life be like if you had to produce your own clothing? So you have to knit all of your clothes. Oh no, but then you only have sweaters, right? That's not enough. You need to make shirt, a pant, underwear, or I don't know. I mean, imagine trying to do that all on your own. Maybe some people would prefer to just come out naked and spending all that time doing that. So this is a good example about thinking about international trade, because most of us do not make our own clothes. And life will be completely different if that's not the case. In Chinese, they call 男耕女织. It's the men who work in the fields to grow rice. They don't stay at home and enjoy. They have to do all of the clothes making and all of that. It's not really housework, it's really home production. You have to produce all of that on your own. That's when there was not enough international trade. Okay, so here we'll look at comparing equilibrium without international trade, where you only have domestic buyers and sellers. Compared to that, of course, if you do not have trade, then the equilibrium price quantity is only determined by domestic market, by the domestic buyers and sellers. But then, so the total benefit is the total surplus, so consumer surplus, producer surplus. So for example, here we have Taiwan, not to be confused with Taiwan, which produces 2,000 thousands of tons of pineapples. So that's 2 million tons of pineapples per year. And it's selling each ton at $24,000. So that's the price of pineapples in Taiwan. And without trade, Taiwan consumes 2,000 or 2 million tons of pineapple. So you have an upper triangle is the consumer surplus, lower triangle is the producer surplus. This is with no trade. Now we're going to look at what happens when there is trade. Survey question. Past major trade deals have benefited most Americans. Agree or disagree? Let's go to, do you think what the American economists, when surveyed to ask this question, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? Past major trade deals have benefited most Americans. 100% economists agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0% or don't know. Okay, so majority of you say 50 to 99%, and that's the right answer. So, okay, so let's take a look. 93% agree, 0% disagree, 7% are not sure. So the majority agree that trade deals have benefited most Americans. So when you have international trade, so what we do is we introduce what we call a world price. So this is the price in the world market. And this is in contrast to the domestic price, which is PD. Without trade, there's only domestic suppliers and consumers, so supply demand determines this domestic price. So if the domestic price is lower than the world price, that means that the domestic country has comparative advantage, and so if you open up the trade, this country would export this good. But if the domestic price is higher than the world price, then this country does not have comparative advantage, so it would import this good. Well, think of this. So previously, you only have the domestic market, so you can only buy and sell at this domestic price. Now, you open up international trade, so here's the world market. So if you don't buy it domestically, you can buy at the world market. So if the world price is lower, then of course consumers will say, why should I buy at this high domestic price? I should go and just buy in the world market and enjoy this low price. Similarly, if the world price is higher than the domestic price, the producer would say, hey, why should I sell in this domestic market? I should just produce it and sell at the world market at this and get a higher price. That's why you have this imports. The world price is lower than the domestic price, and you would export if the world price is higher than the domestic price. Here we're going to impose a small economy assumption. So the idea here is that a small economy like Taiwan is a price taker in the world market. This is an assumption. If you think of it, this is not always true, especially for big countries like the US or China. I mean, these are definitely big players in the world market, so this is an assumption. If you're interested, you should go to take more advanced courses. We have elective courses, international trade, to talk about when this assumption is not hold, what happens. But here, we're going to stick to this small economy assumption. I do want to note that even Taiwan, for some markets, this is not true. For example, for TSMC, has such a big market share in the world market in terms of chipset making, it's likely that the small economy assumption does not apply to these chipset markets in the world. So that's something that you should note, that when we say small or big, this could vary a lot in terms of which industry or which product you're looking at. So here in the simple world, we assume that the small economy is a price taker. So it cannot affect the world price. So that's the assumption. And so what that means is that when a small economy engages in free trade, the world price is the only relevant price. No seller would accept a price below the world price because you can just sell at the world market at that price. And no buyer would pay a price above this world price because, well, if you don't trade domestically, you can just buy it from the world market at this price. So the world price is the only price relevant. Now let's go back to the Taiwan story where it's going to think about pineapples. So without trade, the domestic price is 24,000 NT dollars per ton. So in terms of thousands of tons of pineapples, so Taiwan is selling 2,000. So the quantity is 2,000. Now suppose the world market has a price of 27,000 NT dollars per ton. So under free trade, let's see what's going to happen. The world price is the only thing that's going to matter. So the domestic consumers are going to consume QD, which is 1,600, because the price is 27,000 NT dollars. But domestic producers are going to produce 2,700 QS, because that's at that price. Initially, when we talked about disequilibrium or price control, you have a surplus. But here, this surplus is absorbed by the world market. So these are what we call exports. So there's an excess supply, but these are exported and sold on the world market. All right, so now let's look at how this affects welfare. So without trade, the original consumer surplus is region area A and B, and producer surplus is C. So total surplus is A, B, and C, the sum of that. Now, with trade, so consumer surplus is only A. So it's small because you're paying a higher price. But producer surplus becomes BCD, this huge lower triangle. So total surplus is A plus B plus C, then plus D. So you get this additional gain from trade in area D. Magic. So this is where you get gains from trade when you open up to the world market, because these producers are gaining. Okay, think about an example. When Romania opens itself to international trade, the price of corn in Romania almost doubled. So does Romania have comparative advantage in the production of corn? And is Romania an exporter or an importer of corn? And Romanian consumers of corn will be better off or worse off? How about the producers? And are there any gains from international trade? So, okay, so first one. When Romania, so it used to be under communist rule, so more or less isolated, but now it opens up to international trade. The price of corn almost doubled. So does Romania have comparative advantage in the production of corn? Yes, no, or don't know. All right, so let's look at your answers. So a lot of you say yes, one said no. So, and the answer is yes. So will Romania be an exporter or an importer of corn? Exporter, importer, or don't know? Okay, so let's look at your answers. The majority of you say it's going to be an exporter, and the answer is yes. Yes, you're right. What happens to Romanian consumers of corn? Will they be better off or worse off? And what about producers? So is it that Romanian consumers are better off but producers are worse off? Or Romanian producers are better off but consumers are worse off? Or both consumers and producers in Romania are better off or both are worse off? Okay, so let's look at your answers. So the majority of you say Romanian producers are better off and consumers are worse off, and that is indeed the answer. Because the price of corn doubled, or almost doubled, so producers are selling at a higher price, they're happy. Consumers are paying a higher price, so they're worse off. Okay, are there any gains from trade? Yes, no, don't know. Okay, so I already see the majority of you already answered, so I'll just show the answers. So most of you say yes, and the answer is yes. So, okay, so this is the actual breakdown of Romania's export in 2019. I got this from Wikipedia, and you'll see that corn is over here, which counts as 1.72% of exports of Romania that year. Okay, so let's go back to Taiwan. So think about Taiwan. So Taiwan exports its pineapples, but it imports its cocoa beans. So without trade, maybe Guken or someplace grows some of these beans. And so the domestic price is 90,000 NT dollars with a quantity of 170,000 tons of cocoa beans. And the world price is only 75,000 NT dollars. So now what happens? Well, under free trade, the domestic consumer demand, quantity demanded becomes 200, and quantity supplied is only 150. So it used to be shortage, but this is filled by imports from the world market. So yeah, so this is what happens when there's imports. And let's look at the welfare effect. So originally, without trade, consumer surplus is the upper triangle, area A. The producer surplus is the lower triangle, area B plus C. And then total surplus is ABC. Now, when we have free trade, so the consumer surplus is this huge A plus B plus D, because consumers are enjoying a lower price, so they get this huge consumer surplus. Producer surplus is only C, so because they're receiving this lower price. But total surplus is A plus B plus C, then plus D. So you have this D area, which is gains from trade. Magic. 见证奇迹的时刻. So this is why, in general, economists love free trade, because you get this additional gain in total surplus, compared to like taxes where you get deadweight loss. But here, this is gains from trade. Magic. Okay, so to summarize, whether or not a good is imported or exported, trade always creates winners and losers. But the gains outweigh the losses. So when you import, so that's when the domestic price is higher than the world price over here, you will get imports. Consumer surplus will go up, producer surplus will go down, total surplus will go up. For exports, that's when the world price is higher than domestic price. Consumer surplus goes down, producer surplus goes up, total surplus goes up. So if you think about total surplus, it's always good. So one thing you should note here is that it's always true that when you open up free trade, when you have the international market, when you have world price, one side, there are winners and there are losers. So it's not painless. And so people have to adjust. But if your criteria is in terms of value judgment is about total surplus, that always goes up. So, okay, now let's go back to Romania. So when Romania opens itself to international trade, the price of chocolate in Romania goes down. So does Romania has comparative advantage in production of chocolate or not? And is Romania an exporter or importer of chocolate? And are Romania consumers of chocolate better off or worse off? What about the producers? So now we have the same question, but think about chocolate. And then are there gains from international trade? So first question. So when Romania opens itself to international trade, the price of chocolate in Romania declines. So does Romania has a comparative advantage or in the production of chocolate? Yes, no, or don't know. Okay, so majority of you say no, and the answer is no. Is Romania an exporter or importer of chocolate? So exporter, importer, don't know. Okay, so let me cut short and show the answers. Most of you say importers, and yes. The price dropped because now consumers start to buy from the world market, and so Romania is importing chocolate. What about consumer and producers? Are they better off, worse off? Consumers are better off, but producers are worse off, or producers are better off, consumers are worse off, or both better off, or both worse off? All right, so let's look at your answers. Majority of you say consumers are better off, producers are worse off, and that is indeed the right answer because the price of chocolate dropped, and that means that consumers are enjoying a lower price, producers are not happy, and so are there any gains from trade? Yes, no, or don't know. So, okay, so majority of you say yes, and the answer is yes. So in terms of total surplus, yeah, so there are gains from trade here. So let's look at a survey question that we asked US economists. Imposing new US tariffs on steel and aluminum will improve Americans' welfare. Agree or disagree? And so, okay, so because of time's sake, let's skip the opinion part. Let's go to when the panel surveyed US economists this question, do you think economists agree or disagree with this statement? So imposing new US tariffs on steel and aluminum will improve Americans' welfare. 100% economists agree, 50 to 99%, 1 to 49%, 0%, or don't know. Okay, so let's look at your answers. The majority say 0%, some say 1 to 49%, even fewer say 50 to 90%, and the answer is 0%. So here's the survey result. So yeah, nobody agrees, nobody's unsure, 100% disagreement. Well, that's another consensus, right? Yeah. So now we'll look at what happens when we try to restrict international trade. Tariff is one way. So how about you tax imports? That's tariffs. So compared to free trade, where domestic price will equal to the world price because of this free trade, when you have a tariff, you basically raise the domestic price above the world price. exactly the amount of this tariff. So that basically would have an effect on the market. So let's take a look. So think about Taiwan. So it imposes a tariff on motorcycles. The original price is 75,000 NT dollars. The quantity demanded is 200. Quantity supplied is 150. So the imports are 50. So that's the difference. Now you have $9,000 tariff. So what's happening here is that you're raising the domestic price to $84,000. What this means is that the quantity demanded is going to drop. Here it's going to drop to 82. The quantity supplied is going to increase to 162. And the size of the imports is going to shrink here to 20. So this is the effect of taxing imports. You can imagine different scenarios of, like, say, taxing export and so on. But yeah, so this is the effect. And what's going to happen here, okay, so now we'll look at the welfare. So with free trade, originally we have this huge consumer surplus, A, B, C, D, E, F combined, and small producer surplus, G, and the total surplus is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now with the tariff, consumer surplus now drops to only A plus B, this smaller upper triangle. Producer surplus, the lower triangle, goes up to be C plus G. And now the government gets some tax, right? So the tax revenue that from the tariff is this rectangle E. But what that means is that your total surplus is A, B, C, G, E. That means you have a deadweight loss of D and F. Too bad. So one thing I want to note is that this. So what is D? These domestic producers are producing at a waste because we could have just bought this from the world market at a lower price. But now the society is paying a higher production cost from these domestic producers. And so that's part of the deadweight loss. And what's the deadweight loss of F? The deadweight loss of F comes from consumers, the marginal buyers who are not buying anymore because the price went up from 75,000 to 84,000. So these are the two sources of the deadweight loss. So instead of tariff, you could do import quotas. So you can only import a certain amount. One good example of this is foreign workers in Taiwan. Like, say, long-term care, you need caretakers. We import people for the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, these other foreign countries. But then there's a quota. You can only import a certain amount of foreign workers per year. This is a limit. You cannot import more than that. And you mostly have the same effect of a tariff. You raise the price, reduce quantity of imports. You are reducing buyers' welfare, increasing sellers' welfare. So domestic workers will be happy if you have a quota on foreign workers. But a tariff can raise revenue for the government. But a quota, well, I mean, it only gives whoever gets the quota some surplus. In fact, that's the problem in Taiwan currently, because who gets the quota to import these foreign workers? It's these broker companies, 中介公司. And so they earn a lot. And even you hear these horror stories that these foreign workers have to pay like 5 months of their salary in advance to these brokers in order to get the chance to come to Taiwan. And so they get their passports confiscated and things like that. They're forced to work in very bad conditions. All these stories in the news. And this comes from the fact that, well, the import quota is creating this rent-seeking behavior that, well, if you are one of these people who get the quota, then you gain the surplus. In contrast, if you think of it, like in Singapore, what they do is they just tax foreign workers. So if you want to hire a foreign worker, you pay a certain amount of special labor compensation tax, and that's it. But then that has the similar effect as a quota, but you don't have this rent-seeking problem. For international trade, there are other benefits. You could increase the variety of goods. That's something that's not shown here. You can also exploit economies of scale. TSMC is producing chipsets like crazy and taking advantage of economies of scale. You can make markets more competitive because you're facing these foreign competition. Well, think about professors. I mean, when we hire new professors, our department looks at a lot of foreign PhDs as well. And so what that means is that the market is much more competitive compared to if a department only looks at Taiwanese people who have a PhD. And it makes the economy more productive. So before the midterm, we talked about international trade. We talked about the economic models, supply and demand on international trade. but we didn't really finish this chapter, so we have to finish this. So now we have to finish this chapter. We stopped at this slide when we talked about different benefits of international trade. The models focus on what we call efficiency or total surplus, and to see how there are gains from trade that are realized because of free trade. But in addition to that, there are other benefits for international trade. Here we have, like, say, variety of products. And so that's something that we cannot share if we don't have international trade. Also, firms can utilize economies of scale. That's something that, like a lot of the Taiwanese companies that focus on specific things, but they sell to the whole world, they benefit from economies of scale. And then because when you have more firms globally, so you can make markets more competitive. When we get to monopoly, you will see that the whole problem is the lack of competition. And of course, in that case, the company is very happy, but the consumers would suffer. And then because you're opening up globally, so the economy will become more productive because you specialize on what you do the best instead of doing everything and including things that you're not that good at. And of course, because of this international trade, there's also a lot of room to spread of technology. There's a lot of talk about the trade war causing, like, say, a loss in China in terms of the stop of flow of technology that's pouring in. Yeah. Okay. So now we'll look at some arguments that are against international trade. The first one is the jobs argument, saying that, hey, trade with other countries destroy domestic jobs. In Taiwan, it seems evident because if you think of all these factories in the past, like, say, 20 or 30 years that moved from Taiwan to China, and the workers of these factories lost their jobs. That's a big problem. So the economist's response to this is that international trade not only destroys jobs, but it also creates jobs. Think about the jobs that TSMC is creating now, not only in Hsinchu Science Park, but in Tainan, in Kaohsiung, when it starts to expand. They even have these reports that you can't even find sufficient construction workers in Tainan and Kaohsiung because of all these new projects that's coming. And of course, this is the benefit of international trade. And so when some jobs are lost, well, more jobs are created. Of course, then the problem is the economy as a whole, overall more jobs are created, but that does not mean that if you or your family or your friends are the people who lost their jobs, that does not mean that this goes away. I mean, if I'm in my 40s or 50s, I lose my job because my factory was moved to China or to someplace else, I'm jobless, right? I have to look for a new job, and it's very difficult because if I apply for TSMC, would TSMC say, hey, let's admit this career worker that commands such a high salary but does not have the right degree or the right qualifications for this job? I mean, even if I luckily find another job, I mean, this entire transition is not pleasant. I mean, it's not painless. It's a really likely unpleasant, painful process. So there is this transition. So it's not like destroy job argument is wrong. I mean, there is a real cost here. But it is true that with free trade, in addition to destroying old jobs, it also creates new jobs. So there are winners and losers in this situation. It's just that if you look at the overall situation, as a whole, more jobs are created. So if you look at the data, you'll find that total unemployment does not actually go up because, well, when some jobs are lost, new jobs are created. This is the data from the US, so you can take a look at how the US economy fares here. The US economy has an unemployment rate of up and below 6%. And if you look at from the 60s all the way now to the last decade, you see that imports count as from 4%, it goes all the way up to 16%, so 4 times in terms of percentages of the GDP, but unemployment rate did not increase 4 times. So you know that unemployment rate fluctuates up and down, so imports is going up. So it's not true that imports are destroying jobs, or overall destroying jobs. It destroys jobs, but it also creates jobs so that the overall employment rate is roughly the same. Of course, this is not Taiwan data, this is the US data. If you plot the Taiwanese data, the first thing is that the unemployment rate in Taiwan is lower than this. We complain about, so young people can't find jobs, but if you look at the employment rate statistics, the unemployment rate is much better in Taiwan compared to, say, in the US. And of course, if you look at the percentage of imports and exports, Taiwan is definitely benefiting from international trade. Since the 60s, we have all these stories of how these small businesses, they start to grow because they produce something and sell to the whole world. So that entire process almost summarizes the story of the economic miracle of Taiwan. Okay, so that's enough for this. So let's go to the next argument. The next argument is national security. So this industry is so important for national security, we need to restrict trade in this industry. Actually, in the midterm, I gave a question related to this because Korea just had a crisis because China stopped exporting urea, and so that all of their diesel trucks now cannot function because diesel trucks need urea solution to work. So the Korean government is scrambling to find alternative sources or other ways to try to cope with this crisis. And one good example of this, actually one of the Korean media mentioned that, hey, look at Japan. Japan makes 70% of their urea solution, so they're not hit by this crisis. Maybe we should follow suit. So we could make an argument that, say, urea solution is so vital to national security that we should produce this domestically. And if needed, we should even restrict trade in this industry in order to make sure that the domestic production can go through. One good example of this in Taiwan is agriculture, like say rice. I'm not sure if you tried any imported rice in Taiwan. Because it's almost non-existent. I remember when I first tried rice produced in Thailand, I was like, whoa, this is interesting. I've never tasted this kind of. Although, so people talk about, eat Taiwanese rice, that makes you a Taiwanese, or things like that. And of course, there is potentially an argument here. You say, if China blockades Taiwan, then we'll all starve to death if Taiwan does not grow enough rice for its own people. Taiwan has 24 million people on the island, and if we don't have enough rice, then it's a big problem. So there is a national security argument for restricting trade, if this is so important. And of course, if you're talking about, like, say, military technology, or like, say, cyber warfare, then it is even more evident that, so if the tanks or these weapons made for the army are actually coming from other countries, potentially hostile to you, then if something happens, then you cannot get more of this weapon, or they will have this virus that's in this system that will destroy you, and so on. However, one thing you should note is that, so protecting key industry is an appropriate argument if this concern is true. If you think of it, if I am, like, say, the agriculture industry, of course I would want to say, rice is so important to Taiwan. If there's war, then if we don't produce our own rice, we'll all starve to death and all that. But is that true? It's like, if you think of the debate that's going on, there's an ongoing referendum debate on, like, say, nuclear power plants. The pro-nuclear party would say, nuclear power is so safe, it's green, there's no CO2, and all that. But is that because he or she actually has conflict of interest here, that his career is built on nuclear power, and so if we stop nuclear power, then he'll lose his job? Or is it truly that it is truly the case? Similarly, if you think of doctors, I'm not sure if you ever encountered this, or your family or somebody who encountered this. So you go to a checkup, and then after that, the doctor says, I suspect you might have cancer, so you need to do MRI, do a PET scan, do all these checkups. And the question there is that, is it truly that you need those treatments? Or is it that the doctor is sort of persuaded or pushed by the hospital that you should assign more checkups so that we can get more money from the national health insurance? Well, supposedly the doctors, they all pledged an oath that they have to put the welfare of the patient in front of everything as the top priority instead of the hospital's profit and other things. But whether or not everybody is doing this, that is the question. And here, especially for these industries, every industry would say, hey, we are vital to national security. But is that true? Okay, going back to the rice. The argument about, if we don't grow our rice, then we'll starve to death. The caveat for this argument is the following. If China truly blockades Taiwan, what would happen first? We run out of food or we run out of gasoline? Well, Taiwan imports like close to 100% of its oil. So before we run out of food, we will actually run out of energy to power transportation of this food. And so even if the farmers are growing rice, they can't transport these food to the consumers anymore. And so that is the real problem. I mean, if you're talking about national security, what is the threat in a blockade? And of course, because of that, you need a lot of ways to actually diversify your energy sources, although it's very hard for Taiwan because we don't produce oil domestically. So compared to that, storing or growing sufficient rice may be not as important. So again, the key thing here is that national security is a real concern if it's real. So you have to be careful because every industry would say we are very important, but which one is the real one? Okay, the next one, the infant industry argument. New industries need temporary trade restrictions to help them get started. And older industries need temporary protection to help them adjust to new conditions. So they have these stories about when Taiwan wanted to start to, like say, build a car-making industry. So to protect Yulong as an infant industry, so we need to tax imported cars heavily to make sure that they can grow. And so what we get is Yulong, after 50 years of protection, still not being able to really produce good cars. And the problem here is that it's very difficult to implement this kind of thing because the temporary policy will automatically become permanent. And it's very hard to remove. If you think of, like, say, the protection of car making, literally protecting Yulong, but what has Yulong brought to Taiwan? Well, I mean, they have a former CEO that dresses very well and sells suits much better than selling cars. Now they have all these quality issues that people talk about. And think of it, wait a minute. When TSMC started, did the government protect TSMC? No, but it still grew. So, I mean, if an industry is truly competitive, then it does not need these protections. So here, what you can find is that, at some sense, there could be an argument for this, but to actually implement this is very difficult. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you don't really get what you want. There is even a myth about Taiwan's economic growth. In the early stages, they tried to protect infant industries by restricting trade. But if you really look into the tax rates of different industries, like say in the 1960s and 1970s, you will find that these strategic or these high-tech industries that the government wants to promote and claim to be infant industries do not really have higher tax rates compared to like cement. I mean, the cement industry is dominated by a handful of companies, Tao-yi, Yuandong, a small group of companies, and most of that is domestic. I mean, you would not import cement from some other country because it's just so heavy, it's not really worth it. But those domestic related industries could have even higher tax rates compared to these sort of infant industries that you want to protect. So even in Taiwan, if you look at the actual data, the government may claim they want to protect infant industries, but they're not really doing that. All right, so the next one, the unfair competition argument. Free trade is desirable only if all countries play by the same rules. And so if you are subsidizing your farmers so that you can sell these wheat at such a cheap price, then that's unfair because we're not doing that, but you guys are doing that. But if you think of this, if you import from a country that subsidizes production, that means our consumers are better off because our consumers can get the same product at a lower price. And it's funded by foreign governments. So they pay so that our consumers are happy. Maybe we should be happy about that. There's a lot of arguments about this issue, especially because the US actually subsidizes the US agriculture industry by a lot. And actually, that's one of the consensus among even US economists that you should abolish these agricultural subsidies. But if you think of an importer of US agricultural products, wheat, bread, pork, meat, and all that, well, I mean, that's good, right? I mean, the US government is paying so that our consumers get cheaper products. You should be happy about that. But it is true that our producers are not happy because you have to face competition. These imported products are much cheaper, and yeah, that's not good. But our consumers are benefiting even more. So, okay, so here, again, all of these arguments, it's not to say that all these arguments are wrong, but there's another side of the story that we should really think about. And if you ask me, yeah, I mean, the problem for international trade is precisely that there are winners and losers. Although if you say, oh, let's look at total surplus, the gains outweigh the losses, but it does not mean that this transition, or it does not mean that if you are the loser in the situation, it's painless. No, it's not. It is a painful process. And of course, I mean, life is hard. I mean, people face trade-offs. So even the whole country faces trade-offs. Okay, I think this is the last argument. The protection as a bargaining chip argument. Trade restriction can be useful when we bargain with our trading partners. So it's like, okay, I'm going to restrict trade, and then if you don't open up your market, then I don't want to open up mine. So the idea here is that if this other government is imposing a restriction, then we should impose a restriction and bargain with that government so that we can actually remove that restriction. And the problem here is that this threat may not work, because if I threat that, okay, so if you don't do this, then I'll do that, and the other side says, okay, I don't care, then you have to do that, right? I think the only person that might work is Donald Trump. He has done a lot of this during his term in terms of imposing these different trade restrictions, tariffs, in retaliation of the other side rejecting or ignoring his threats. Yeah. But of course, I mean, Donald Trump, I think, is the outlier here. But I mean, in most cases, the whole problem here is that if you want to really bargain, you really have to follow through. But it's not easy. Okay, so now let's look at, here's a statement, and see if you agree or disagree, or do economists agree or disagree. So refusing to liberalize trade unless partner countries adopt new labor or environmental rules is a bad policy. Because even if the new standards would reduce distortions on some dimensions, such a policy involves threatening to maintain large distortions in the form of restricted trade. It's like, so I demand you to have this labor rule or environmental rule, otherwise you would have this trade restriction. So do you agree or disagree? And do economists agree or disagree with this statement that these threats, or saying that, oh, so I will restrict trade unless you adopt these new rules, this is not a good idea, because even if some of these new rules go through, there's this big harm of restricting trade. Okay, so do you agree or disagree with this statement? You can strongly agree, uncertain, disagree, or strongly disagree, or you have no opinion, or you can also prefer not to answer. Okay, so let's look at your answers. A lot of people agree, but there are some people who disagree or are not sure. That's okay. This is a pool, so there's no absolute right or wrong answer here. But the next one is for you to predict. So do you think, when surveyed about this question, do economists agree or disagree? So do 100% economists agree with this argument, or 50 to 99%, or 1 to 49%, 0%, or don't know? Okay, so time's up. Let's look at your answers. A lot of you say 50 to 99%. Some of you say 1 to 49%. And the answer is actually 1 to 49%. Let's take a look. So actually economists are divided here. 49% agree, 25% disagree, and 26% are not sure. Even among expert economists, trade is a debated topic. It's not like everybody agrees that trade is definitely good and that's it. Actually, in one of our midterm questions, we saw this. The EU is saying that we were going to tax you if you produce too much carbon emission and your local country does not tax carbon. And that is a policy that's like this, saying that, so if your country does not adopt these carbon taxation, this environmental rule, then we will be taxing you instead. Of course, that is the case where there is externalities, and so no wonder there are so many disagreements and uncertainty here. All right, so the last part of this lecture, we'll talk about some trade agreements and the WTO. WTO is very important to Taiwan because international trade is a very important component. It used to be that 90% of the GDP is exports. And now it's not that high, but still, I mean, it's still a very big portion of our GDP. So the WTO is trying to say, let's try to all go to free trade. Yeah. And compared to that, there are some cases where countries say, hey, I'll just drop all these restrictions and allow anybody to import or for our companies to export to other countries. That's called a unilateral approach to achieve free trade. There are some examples of this, but in most cases, what we have is a multilateral approach that I will drop my restriction if you drop yours. So let's all do this together. And so there was the NAFTA, but now it's replaced by the USMCA. And then there's the GATT that Taiwan is one of the members of. So the NAFTA started in 1993, where they tried to lower these trade barriers between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And the GATT, this is an ongoing series of negotiations to try to promote free trade, although there are some issues here. Yeah, so during the Great Depression, there were a lot of tariffs imposed. So after the World War II, there were a lot of these negotiations to try to drop these tariffs. So the tariffs went down from 40% to 5%. And now the GATT is enforced by the WTO, which accounts for 97% of world trade, which covers 164 countries. So the good thing for this multilateral approach is that, I mean, if I unilaterally decide to promote free trade, other countries won't move. But if we try to negotiate and cooperate to both lower our tariffs, lower our trade barriers, then the overall condition could be even better because not only I reduce my trade barriers, but also other countries. And the other thing is that here you actually have a political advantage because if you want to convince your people to achieve free trade, there's winners and losers. So if you do this alone, then, I mean, you are creating winners and losers and there's no way to compensate. But if we're doing this together, then there'll be multiple winners and multiple losers across various different kinds of industries because you will be exporting to other countries. And so when those countries achieve free trade, then your producers will be the winners. And so in terms of pushing for a better situation to convince different parties, well, it's easier to do this. So the last situation here that we'll talk about here is you're watching a referendum debate. I believe the official referendum debate has started in the past couple of weeks, and so it's ongoing. Here's one guy. One side says, I'm for free trade, but it must be safe trade. If foreign producers have lax environmental regulations or nuclear regulations, or feed their pigs with harmful chemicals, we should retaliate with import restrictions on their goods to show them that we won't be played for fools. So if a country has lax environmental regulations or grows their pigs with ractopamine and then exports the product to us, who gains and who loses in our country? Okay, so here's the question. So if a foreign country has these lax rules, so they feed their pigs with ractopamine and export the products to us, who are the winners and losers of our country? All wins. Consumer gets a safer product and producer has less competition. Producers lose. Both lose either for body and money. Everyone loses. President Tsai gains. I love this. I think the key thing is to make sure the actual situation. So if this lax environmental regulation is harming the environment of that foreign country, then maybe we shouldn't care that much, right? I mean, that foreign country is losing because they have a worse environment. But if the product that comes in is not affected, then our consumers are enjoying the same quality, the same product at a lower price. That's good. Of course, our domestic producers will be unhappy because they're facing fierce competition from these cheaper products. But as long as the product itself is of the same quality, then our consumers are gaining, even though our producers are facing fierce competition. So the key thing here is whether or not the product that's coming in is of the same quality. There is a lot of debate about how poisoned these pigs are if they were fed these crazy chemicals. But what you should look at is, do we actually find these chemicals in the products that we receive? Because if the products are of the same quality, then it doesn't matter. Okay, yeah, I really love this. Yeah, President Tsai gains. There is this political issue that's going on. But I think the key thing here is that, so if foreign countries are subsidizing their production, damaging their environment, well, as long as the products are of the same quality, well, I think there could be an argument that we should care about other people's environment as well. But in terms of our country, ourselves, well, maybe we shouldn't care that much about other people's environment. Oh, I sound like a crude economist saying that. But I think there is some priority here. So there are some environmental issues like global warming that's going to affect everybody. So maybe we should care about that. But it does not really change that there are winners and losers in our country. Okay, the next one. If a foreign country subsidizes the production of a good exported to Taiwan, who bears the burden of their mistaken policy? And what happens to our overall economic well-being if we restrict trade with a country that subsidizes its export industries? So now we're not talking about lax regulations, we're talking about subsidy. So if the US is subsidizing its agriculture so that it's selling these cheap products, so who bears the burden of this policy? And if we restrict trade with them, so what happens to our overall economic well-being? Okay, so if a foreign country subsidizes the production of a good exported to Taiwan, who bears the burden of this mistaken policy? Okay, so if a foreign country subsidizes production of a good exported to Taiwan, well, the taxpayers of those foreign countries will be paying this price because the subsidy is funded by taxpayer money. And of course, our domestic producers will be facing even more competition because of this low price. And so their loss would increase. So the loss of producer surplus for domestic producers will also increase. The next one. What happens to overall economic well-being if we restrict trade with a country that subsidizes its export industries? Okay, so I think most of you got the point. Yeah, so the key thing here is that when we restrict trade, the producer surplus would increase because of these trade restrictions, but consumer surplus will be reduced, and so that total surplus actually goes down. All right, so Taiwan is thinking of joining the CPTPP, but we passed a referendum to ban Japanese nuclear food from Fukushima and surrounding areas. And now we're holding a referendum next month for banning imports of American pork grown with ractopamine. And so is it a good policy to threaten trade restrictions in the hope that foreign governments will reduce their trade restrictions? And the referendum would likely affect Taiwan's bid for joining CPTPP. So why aren't people taking into consideration? That's something that I always find mysterious. So if you're interested, you should watch the debates. Yeah, it's very interesting. For time reasons, I'll have to skip these two questions and close this chapter because we'll be starting a classroom experiment the next class. So if the domestic price is lower than the world price, you have a competitive advantage. That means you are an exporter. If you have a higher domestic price, then you don't have that competitive advantage. You are an importer. And so when a country allows trade, then it produces things that it has competitive advantage on and exports that. Consumers are worse off, but producers are better off. If it imports, it's the flip side. Consumers are better off, producers are worse off. But the gains outweigh the losses. Tariffs or taxing imports, it reduces these gains from trade. And then there are various arguments for restricting trade that we spent a whole hour talking about today. That's much longer than I expected. But so protecting jobs, defending national security, helping infant industries, preventing unfair competition, responding to foreign trade restrictions. Some of these arguments do have merit in some cases, but there's always the other side of this story. So here is my one-slide summary. Imports benefit consumers, exports benefit producers, and trade benefits the entire economy. So there are a lot of current issues related to this, where a lot of political debates on this. Should Taiwan sign a BTA with the US, or sign ECFA with China, sign FTA with other countries, or join the CPTPP? So all of these are very important arguments. And this is the homework from the textbook, and this is the past exams that happen. And of course, this year midterm, we will add more to this list. Okay, so let me stop here and prepare for the experiment. So the experiment today, because we're going to talk about production, we're going to do chain production. So 4 of you would form a group. I have to apologize for people online because this has to be done in person because you have to physically produce something. Each group will receive a kit. There will be a tape, 1 color pencil, a paper box, and paper slips. And so your job is to produce chains only with these things. So you cannot use anything else. So during the break, please form groups of 4 people and sit together and prepare to do this classroom experiment. And so once you form a group, send your group leader down here to the TA to receive these things. If you are left alone, please come down. The TA will play with you. All right, so now let's see why it's 4 people. All right, so this is chain production. So how do we produce these chains or rings? So first, you use the color pencil to connect the dots. Each slip has these dashed lines. So you connect these dashed lines. And please draw 1 slip at a time because there are some crazy ways to have to line up 5 slips and then just do 1 draw and get all of those. No, 1 slip at a time. And please clear your tables. It's a clean bench for you to produce. Then the second thing is tape the slip into a ring. So that's why we have tape for each group. You have 1 tape. And the third thing is when you tape it, you have to combine the rings into a chain. That's why this is called chain production. So when at the end of the production, you can show us how long your chain is and tell us how many rings are in this chain. Okay? Pretty easy, right? 3 steps. Draw the straight lines, tape the slip into a ring, and combine rings into chains. Each chain counts for 15 e-coins, and we'll convert that into points. Labor and capital are both costly. So we have 4 rounds. Each round you will have 1 minute to produce and 30 seconds to discuss before the production. And your earning is going to be the maximum profit across the 4 rounds. So you have several attempts. So each group has a toolkit. So I assume all of you have a kit. And okay, round 1. You can only use 1 person to produce. So you have to pick one of you. You think the best producer, the best guy in arts and crafts. You have 30 seconds to discuss. And we shall start before that. So you have to decide who you want to produce and so on. If you just came into the classroom, please come down. Please come down to see the TA, and you will form a group. Okay, so 30 seconds, time's up, get ready. So only one person. Everybody else, you should stand aside. You cannot touch it. One person, ready, set, go. 60 seconds to produce. No, the other people, you cannot touch it. You cannot help. No touching, only one person. Yeah, the other people cannot touch the slips, cannot touch the pencil, cannot touch the tape. Only one person. You have only 20 seconds left. Please hurry up. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Time's up. Okay. So please show us your rings. Please raise your rings. Okay. So now on your record sheet, please record how many rings you produced in your chain. Okay, let's see. This group has two rings in the chain. How many? 2? How many? Oh, whoa, 1, 2, 3, 4 rings in the chain. Whoa, that's great. This one, 3. How many? 2? 1. Okay. What about the group in the back? 6? Whoa, 6 is the leader. 6 chains. 5. Okay. Well, 4. 1. Okay. What about the 2 group in the back? What about this group? How many do you have? 2. Okay. 2. Okay. So now we see the leader has 6 rings. You might have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please write it on your record sheet. Round 1. You produce with one person, you produce how many rings on your chain? Okay, next one, now round 2. You can use 2 people in this round. So now discuss. 30 seconds discussion. Okay, time's up. Please choose 2 people. Only the 2 people can touch it. And ready, set, go. 60 seconds to produce. Thirty seconds left. Hurry up. Twenty seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Time's up. Okay, so please show your chains. Please show your chains. Let's see how many chains do you have. 1, 2, 7. How many? 5. How many? 6. How many chains do you have? What? 14. Whoa, 11. In the back, how many do you have? 3? Okay. So for the 2 groups in the back, how many chains do you have? 13. Okay, this group? 12. How many? 6. How many do you have? 9. Okay, over here 6. In the back, how many chains do you have? 4. Oh, okay. All right, so please write in the round 2, how many rings in the chain do you have? Now we have a bonus round 2. Now use the other 2 members of your group and do this again. Again, you have 30-second discussion, and then we will start. Okay, so time's up. Get ready. Ready, set, 1 minute. Thirty seconds. Hurry up. Okay, time's running out. Time's up, time's up, time's up. Okay, so please show your rings. How many do you have? 6 in the back. So how many rings do you have? 6. How many is that? What? 14? 15. Woo, that's great. How many? 13. Okay. How many do you have? 8. That's okay. Woo. Hey, wait a minute. Why is that group that long? That's not right? Okay, so we have a group that has 15. Do we have even more? All right, so please put down the 2 numbers for round 2, each separately. Please do not add them up. It's only one of it counts. The more productive counts. If you're finished, please put the chain into your recycle bin so that you have to start with new material next time. If you have unfinished material, please, or the chain, please put it into the recycle bin. We will have to start round 3. So please record your round 2 results, and we'll go into round 3. What do you expect in round 3? Yes, we will have 3 people. And it's the 3 people who did not participate in round 1. So 3 people in round 3. Please discuss how you want to produce. And then we will start the experiment. Okay, so are you ready? Let's start. 60 seconds. Time's up, time's up. Okay, so please show us your chains. How many rings do you have in this chain? How many? 10. 10. How many? 8, 9. How many? 7. 11. In the back, how many rings do you have? 12. In the back, how many? 15. All right, so please record this in round 3, and we will go into round 4. What do you expect is going to happen in round 4? All 4 members in the group will participate. Please discuss how you want to produce. And please recycle your round 3 material in your recycle bin. Okay, so get ready. Ready, set, go. 60 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up! Time's up! Time's up. Okay, now so please record your results in the last row in round 4. Okay, so how many rings do you have in your group? Yeah, so how many? Less than last time. Only 7. How many? 13. 15. Okay. 10. Okay. 12. Okay, so how many groups had less rings than round 3? Okay, so some groups have less. How many groups had more than round 3? How many groups had the same number of rings compared to round 3? Okay, yeah, so here you see when you add more and more labor, that does not mean that productivity goes up. All right, so please look at your record sheet and let's try to fill this out. On your record sheet, what's down here is a production function. So you basically try to produce chains of rings with capital and labor. What labor do we have? What capital do we have? So here's a hypothetical group that I made up. So this group produced 3 rings with only 1 labor, 8 rings in round 2 with 2 labor, 11 in round 3, and 12 rings in round 4. Of course, your numbers may be different, so please put in your numbers. So each ring you can sell for $15. So you can calculate your total revenue for each round. So for round 1, you can earn $45 out of 3 rings. Round 2, $120. Round 3, you have $165 for 11 rings. In round 12, you have $180 for 12 rings. So that's your total revenue. Then now you have to think about your cost. You need 1 tape and 1 pencil. A tape is 25 NT dollars. A pencil is $15. So your fixed cost is $40, regardless of which round you are. But your variable cost depends on your labor. So each person is $10. So your variable cost is 10, 20, 30, and 40. So if you add up your fixed costs and variable costs, you get your total cost. And then you can calculate your profit by having your total revenue minus total cost. So in this example, if you produce only 3 rings, your profit is negative. You shouldn't even produce. But depending on how many rings you produce, you might have a higher or lower profit each round. In the lecture of chapter 13, we will start to look at marginal product of labor. That's how much this additional person adding into the production would create. So for example, going from 0 to 3, that means the first person's marginal product is 3 rings. Going from 3 to 8, the second person's marginal product is 5 rings. And going from 8 to 11, the third person's marginal product is 3 rings. And going from 11 to 12, the fourth person's marginal product is 1 ring. In some of your cases, some of your groups have lower production in round 4 compared to round 3. That means that your marginal product of the last person is negative. Okay, and so here, by multiplying marginal product of labor with the value, you can actually get how much this last person added to this production. So you multiply the 3 by the $15. The first person's marginal product is $45. The second person is $75, and the third person is $45. The last person is $15. That's the value of the marginal product. And the marginal cost for that labor is the labor cost of $10. So in this case, the value is always higher than the cost. So hiring another person is helpful or would increase the profit of that person. Here, in some of your groups where you got negative marginal product, then it's not even worth it to hire the last person. You should have just fired the last person and used 3 people or 2 people instead. Okay, good question. Why is the case that having more people in this chain production may not be a good idea? Well, because we have only 1 pencil and 1 tape, right? So if we don't have enough capital, then it may not be a good idea to have so many labor crowding the factory and not really doing anything. And of course, you can think of ways to improve. I think one group commented that this tape is not very easy to use. So improving your factory, your machinery, to have better capital, of course, that would also help you have a higher production output or efficiency. Okay, so what you have in the back, okay, so here in this example, profit is maximized at round 4 with 100. Your result may be different because some of you have different numbers, total production, and some of you have even negative marginal product, so things are different. Okay, so one issue is so how would profit change if the wages went to $20? That's one interesting question, because if you change this to $20, then all of this variable costs, total costs, and profit calculation would also change. Okay, now I'm going to try to plot the production function. So on the back of your record sheet, here we have the production function. So on the front you would have, so with 0 labor, you have 0 production. So the production function is the relationship between labor and total production. So with 0, 0, that's the origin. With 1 unit of labor, you produce, like say, 3 rings or whatever number you had. And then with 2 units of labor, you get 8 rings. 3 units, you get 11 rings. And 4 units, you get 12 rings. So you have this production function that's plotted like this. For you guys, of course, your numbers are different. So you could get different production function. You get different shapes of the production function. So one thing to note is that your marginal product, that actually reflects the slope of the production function. And it actually increases at the beginning, but then decreases later on. Some of you have negative marginal product, so the production function actually goes downward instead of increasing. So the marginal product determines the shape of your production function. And you will see here that you have diminishing marginal returns, that the marginal product drops further when you add more labor. Sometimes it diminishes to even to be negative in some of the groups. Okay, so this is the production function. So you can think of various different production functions. Here I'm showing you several different pictures from different textbooks. It could be 3D, it could have different shapes. When you increase technology, for example, if I give you a tape that's more easy to use than one that you have, or if I give you another pencil, things like that, of course, the production function would also change. Now, okay, so then we'll look at the cost functions. So on the right side of your record sheet, you have the cost functions. So you can plot all of your, for each production, so fixed cost is always $40, so regardless of your output. And then your variable cost, of course, depends on which round it is, 10, 20, 30, 40. And then the total cost is you add these two up. And so you're basically shifting the variable cost curve up by exactly the amount of the fixed cost. And so how is production related to cost? And so if you look at these two graphs, what you get is that if you multiply the amount of labor by the wage, then that's your variable cost. And so that's reflected on the other side. And so here you can think about other ways to extend this, but for time's sake, we'll stop here.